Upon my return from lunch, I found the videotape among my mail on the desk. As a co-owner of a video editing and production firm, receiving tapes was routine, but this one stood out. It was addressed to me personally, with no return address, in bold block letters. Intrigued, I delayed returning to my editing job and opened the envelope. Inside was an unlabeled tape. Curiosity getting the better of me, I inserted it into the VCR. The footage, amateurishly made, showed a bedroom with an unoccupied king-size bed. Shortly after, a couple entered and began undressing each other. The man, in his 30s, appeared sleek, while the woman's back was visible, showcasing her shapely figure. Within moments, the couple engaged in intense foreplay, swiftly transitioning to intercourse without any romantic gestures. Puzzled by the unexpected delivery of an amateur adult tape, I decided to return to work, pausing the video. However, before I could stop it, I glanced back at the screen and froze. The woman astride the man was unmistakably my wife, Amy. In disbelief, I halted the tape and sank into my chair, grappling with the incomprehensible reality before me. Until that moment, I believed my marriage to Amy was unshakable, filled with love and trust. We had been happily married for over 4 years, with no hint of infidelity or discontent. Lost in a whirlwind of emotions, I struggled to comprehend the revelation before me. The tape shattered my reality, leaving me with unanswered questions and a surge of anger. Closing my office door, I resolved to delve deeper, watching and rewatching the tape in search of clarity, despite the torment it brought. The videotape was an unedited original, captured by a single camera, likely hidden in a bedroom. It depicted Amy engaged in various sexual activities with an unknown man over the course of 2 hours. However, the sound was distorted, rendering their conversation unintelligible. Following their initial encounter, which involved Amy straddling the man, they took a brief rest before she proceeded to perform oral sex on him. Despite her attentive actions, such as caressing his genitals, the scene starkly contrasted with my experiences with Amy. For instance, she swallowed his ejaculate, a gesture she had never made with me. After a period of casual conversation, they resumed their sexual activity, with the man penetrating Amy from behind. To my astonishment, he then proceeded to engage in anal intercourse with her, without any apparent objection from Amy. Throughout this encounter, Amy remained passive, showing neither pleasure nor resistance. Subsequently, the man collapsed from exhaustion, while Amy attentively tended to him, cleaning his genitalia with a washcloth. She then resumed oral sex, demonstrating a determination to gratify him, even as he appeared to be half asleep. Grimly analyzing the footage from a professional standpoint, I sought further clues to understand Amy's actions. The bedroom appeared opulent, suggesting the man's affluence. Natural light indicated daytime filming. The man, roughly 30 years old, displayed a sense of familiarity and possessiveness toward Amy, indicating a pre-existing relationship. Conversely, Amy's demeanor appeared dutiful and devoid of genuine enthusiasm. Her forced smiles and lack of pleasure during intimate moments suggested a stark contrast in their emotional engagement. Overall, the footage left me grappling with the unsettling disparity between Amy's behavior in the video and our marital relationship, prompting a search for answers amidst a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. I found myself grappling with a myriad of questions, each one more confounding than the last. Beyond the initial shock of discovering my wife's infidelity, I was left pondering why Amy had engaged in over 2 hours of sexual activity with another man, displaying a lack of enthusiasm throughout. Equally perplexing was the realization that she had participated in acts with him that she had adamantly refused with me. My first encounter with Amy occurred when I was 31 and she was merely 20, interning at our office while attending the University of Cincinnati. We often extended job offers to interns interested in the video production field, and Amy proved to be the most exceptional candidate we had ever seen. Bright, responsible, and proactive, she quickly impressed us. Despite feeling drawn to Amy from the start, I understood the importance of maintaining a strictly professional relationship. We worked closely together in the editing booth, sharing many hours, yet I never crossed the line of propriety. Our interactions were friendly and occasionally playful, but always respectful. When Amy's internship concluded, I was tempted to ask her out, but I resisted. The significant age gap and her status as a student made me hesitant to pursue anything beyond a professional connection. 2 years later, fate intervened, and I encountered Amy once more. Now a college graduate, she was seeking a position at the local CBS affiliate and visited our office for an updated recommendation letter. Seizing the opportunity, I invited her to lunch after she secured the job, and our chemistry was undeniable. It wasn't until later, during our engagement, that Amy revealed her initial visit had been orchestrated. She had harbored mutual feelings for me during her internship, using the pretext of the recommendation letter as an excuse to reconnect. Amy was unlike anyone I had ever known. Her exuberance for life, coupled with her striking beauty and intelligence, captivated me completely. Our relationship blossomed from casual lunch dates to romantic dinners, eventually culminating in shared weekends and intimate moments. Initially, our sexual connection was deeply fulfilling. I reveled in pleasuring Amy, prioritizing foreplay and tender caresses. Whether she desired a slow build-up or expressed eagerness for immediate intimacy, I was attentive to her needs and eager to satisfy them. Our compatibility extended beyond the physical realm, with our emotional connection seemingly perfect in every aspect. On various occasions, Amy took charge in our lovemaking sessions, exploring my body with her hands and mouth to heighten my arousal. However, she never brought me to climax orally, preferring instead to pleasure me with her mouth and hands while I refrained from any forceful movements. It became evident to me over time that while our sexual encounters with Amy were wonderful, her preferences were relatively limited. She preferred gentle and tender lovemaking, avoiding anything too rough or forceful. She declined the idea of oral ejaculation and preferred a few familiar positions over experimentation with others. Additionally, she expressed discomfort with the idea of anal sex, which I respected and never pushed. Despite these limitations, our sexual relationship was loving, exciting, and frequent. Beyond the bedroom, Amy and I found numerous ways to complement each other. We both enjoyed staying in most evenings, relishing the opportunity to cook together and try new recipes. Our domestic routines, such as washing dishes together, brought us joy and strengthened our bond. Having a younger, beautiful wife whom I could teach and protect brought me immense happiness. Amy, in turn, appreciated the security and experience I offered as someone older who had explored the world. Although she playfully called me old man, we both understood it to be an affectionate term that reflected our mutual love and understanding. We felt like we had found the perfect match in each other, completing the puzzle of our lives. I was content and fulfilled in our relationship until the afternoon I watched the videotape. The betrayal I witnessed left me devastated, disgusted, and utterly confused. I couldn't fathom why Amy would cheat on me, let alone engage in acts that contradicted her conservative sexual nature. Seeing her enthusiastically participate in sexual activities with another man, including acts she had previously declined with me, shattered my perception of our marriage. I was torn between the love I still felt for Amy and the overwhelming disgust and betrayal I experienced. The thought of returning to our previous intimate and affectionate interactions felt impossible, knowing what I had seen on the tape. This betrayal had unfolded completely unbeknownst to me. I would have staked everything on Amy's faithfulness. How had I become the stereotypical husband betrayed by his wife? How could I ever rebuild the trust one had in her? Despite spending the entire afternoon grappling with that cursed videotape, I arrived home before Amy. On Wednesdays, she worked late shifts and usually returned after 7 p.m. Typically, I would have dinner ready for us by then. So, when she walked in and found me sitting at the kitchen table in the semi-darkness, it was unusual. There was no meal being prepared, no table set. She seemed surprised, but pleased to see me, her eyes gleaming with happiness. "Hi, sweetie. How was your day? Are we going out for dinner tonight?" Her voice was cheerful as she switched on the lights and scanned the kitchen, oblivious to the lack of dinner preparation. Without responding to her question, I gently pushed her away as she tried to kiss me affectionately. Amy, why don't you take a seat over there? We need to talk, I said softly. Amy's expression shifted to seriousness, but not yet to alarm. She complied, asking, "Is something wrong, Mark?" I gazed at her silently, steeling myself for what was about to unfold. The end of our happiness, well, the end of hers. Mine had ceased hours ago. There was no point in prolonging the agony. I had no desire to torment her. "Amy, how many other men have you slept with since we got married?" I asked calmly, cutting straight to the chase. "What?" Her shocked and half-gasped response was immediate. She looked pale, frozen in disbelief, her eyes locked on mine. "It's a straightforward question, at least, I hope it is." "I certainly hope you haven't lost count," I retorted, unable to resist a touch of sarcasm. My anger simmered, restrained, and almost detached. There would be no screaming, no hurling of accusations. She didn't break eye contact, her voice strained and quiet as she pleaded, "Mark, you know how much I love you. Why are you accusing me of this?" Not dignifying her question with a response, I simply tapped my fingers on the videotape lying on the table. I had brought home a copy after securing the original in my office drawer. Amy glanced at the tape, then back at me, her expression a mix of horror and surprise. "You didn't know you were being recorded?" I inquired. She shook her head, averting her gaze to the floor, a heavy silence enveloping us. Finally, she whispered, "Mark, I'm so sorry. It happened only once. I know that's probably not much consolation." Another pause followed before she continued, "It meant nothing. It was just sex. I didn't even enjoy it." Her eyes met mine again. "If you saw the tape, you must have seen that. It was awful, I hated every minute of it." Suddenly, tears streamed down her face, and she began to sob. "I'm so sorry." She attempted to embrace me, but I recoiled. I couldn't bear the thought of touching her. Despite my instinct to console her, to wipe away her tears and fix everything, my anger and confusion consumed me. I retreated to the other side of the kitchen, leaving her standing by the table, crying uncontrollably, her hands limp by her sides. In that moment, she seemed fragile and vulnerable. She cried for what felt like an eternity, and I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Eventually, I fetched the tissue box and a glass of water. She sat down, her sobs gradually subsiding. After wiping her tears and taking a sip of water, she sighed. Looking at me with exhaustion in her eyes, she repeated, "I'm so sorry, Mark." Overwhelmed by my own harshness but unable to hold back, I demanded, "How do you even know who and what I saw on that tape?" Her gaze turned fierce, full of anger, before softening into resignation after a moment. "Trust me, Mark, I know. It could only have been that one afternoon, about 4 months ago. It's the only time I've been with another man since we started dating." She spoke softly, but her tone carried a sincerity that, despite my anger, made me believe her. If there had been other instances, how could she be so certain about the contents of the tape? More silence followed. I felt lost, torn between hurt and bewilderment. "Tell me about it," I demanded. "Who, when, and above all, why?" Her weary expression shifted to one of sorrow or perhaps a newfound fear. Pleadingly, she reached out her hand across the table towards mine, which I kept just out of her reach. "None of that matters, Mark. I love you, more than I thought possible, and I know you know that. Please, think of this as a mistake. A horrible, regrettable mistake. One that I'll spend the rest of my life making up to you, if you'll allow me." I stared at her in disbelief. "That's it? It was a mistake? Am I supposed to just forgive and forget?" "Amy, we made vows to be faithful to each other. That meant not betraying each other's trust in such a devastating way. Do you expect me to just accept your apology without understanding why this happened?" My voice rose, and I struggled to control my anger. "How can I trust you after this? No, I need to know why you did it. You don't have to divulge every detail, I've already seen enough. but you have to explain why you chose to be with someone else." Tears welled up in her eyes once more, and she shook her head softly. "Mark, I can't. I just can't. Can't you trust me enough to believe me when I say that this won't happen again?" I scoffed at her, my anger palpable. "Trust you? Are you serious? This is not the time to ask for my trust. For one thing, it's obvious this wasn't your first encounter with that jerk. Yet here you are, claiming it happened only once." She looked at me with despair in her eyes. I knew him from before, Mark. From California, before I met you." That explanation made some sense, or at least seemed plausible. "What's his name?" Reluctantly, she muttered, "Andy Darnton." "And what possessed you to be with Mr. Andy Darnton? Is it because I'm older? Because I'm nearly 40? Have I suddenly become inadequate in bed, prompting you to seek pleasure elsewhere?" Amy had been composed, almost resigned, for a brief moment. But now she broke down into tears once again, her sobs echoing in the room. Her words were barely intelligible. "Please, Mark, please. It's not like that. You know I love the way you make love to me. I'm so sorry. I never intended to hurt you, and I swear I'll never do it again. Please, please don't make me talk about it." I sat there, staring at her as she wept. I felt a whirlwind of emotions: love, anger, sympathy, and utter confusion. How could Amy expect me to overlook this? It made no sense. She owed me an explanation, at the very least. But it had to start with the truth. For the next 10 minutes, we argued fruitlessly. I attempted to remain calm and rational, but soon my voice rose, and she recoiled from me in fear. With a curse, I stormed off to the bedroom, leaving her crying at the kitchen table. Moments later, I returned with 2 suitcases I had hastily packed. "Amy, I don't know if our marriage can survive this. You know how much I love you, but you've hurt me more than you realize. The only thing I'm certain of is that if you refuse to tell me how and why this happened, our marriage is over. You can reach me on my cell or at work." I headed for the door. Behind me, Amy wailed in despair, pleading for me to stay, but I didn't look back. I heard her footsteps rushing towards me, but before she could reach me, I shut the door behind me. If there's anything worse than discovering your wife's betrayal, it's spending 2 weeks alone in a Holiday Inn room with nothing but your thoughts. During those 2 weeks, all I did was work, return to the room, and contemplate Amy. I oscillated between despair, anger, and confusion, sometimes experiencing all 3 simultaneously. What did I know? Not much. My wife had been unfaithful with someone from her past. Was it truly a one-time occurrence? Did she genuinely not want it to happen? If so, why did it happen? And why did she engage with him so freely, giving him pleasures she denied me? Amy called me repeatedly, leaving impassioned messages on both my phones. Initially, the calls were frequent, but they gradually tapered off to once a day. She expressed her love for me, her desperation without me, and pleaded for us to reconcile somehow. Occasionally, I returned her calls, only to be met with relief and excitement from her end. However, as soon as I mentioned the need for an explanation regarding her infidelity, she broke into wild sobs. Every conversation ended in frustration. Eventually, I stopped returning her calls altogether. Feeling at a loss, I decided to track down Mr. Andy Darnton, if that was indeed his real name. A Google search yielded surprising information. Mr. Darnton, aged 32, had been killed in a traffic accident 2 weeks prior to me receiving the videotape. It was reported that he was married to a Patricia Romano, residing in the Cincinnati suburbs. Without a better plan, I called the Darnton household. When a woman answered, I identified myself and requested to speak with Patricia Romano. After a lengthy silence, she responded, "I had a feeling you'd call." We arranged to meet at a local coffee shop that afternoon. Patricia, a tall and slim woman in her early 30s with short black hair, appeared tired and despondent. Expressing my condolences, I said, "Thank you for meeting me, Ms. Romano. I was sorry to hear about your husband." "He was a lying, cheating jerk," she replied with a sad smile. "But I loved him, and I only found out about most of his infidelity after he passed away." Curious, I asked, "Did you send me that videotape?" "Yes, and I'm truly sorry if it caused you pain or affected your marriage. I was upset and not thinking clearly," she admitted. Over coffee, Patricia shared her story. She and Andy had met in California 2 years earlier, quickly marrying after falling in love. Upon moving to Cincinnati for Andy's job managing strip clubs, Patricia discovered hidden videotapes in their home, each depicting Andy with a different woman. Shocked and hurt, she anonymously mailed the tapes to the husbands of 3 of the women Andy had been involved with. "Once again, I apologize, Mr. Bernier. Between grieving and hating Andy, my judgment was clouded. I can only imagine how difficult it must have been for you," Patricia said. Curious about any connections Andy might have had with Amy or the other women, I inquired, "Do you know if your husband knew Amy or any of the other women before your marriage?" She pondered for a moment. "I'm not sure. It's a possibility, but Andy never really talked much about his past relationships with me. The tapes were too distressing for me to watch in their entirety. Once I realized what they contained, I couldn't bring myself to continue." Back in my hotel room, I reflected on what I had discovered. Amy had confirmed one detail for me, the name of her lover. However, it left me with countless unanswered questions and an overwhelming amount of unresolved pain. After approximately 2 weeks, Amy ceased leaving me voicemail messages. Unsure of the significance, I received a letter at my workplace the following day. Opening it with hope, I was disappointed to find it was a repetition of her previous letters, affectionate, apologetic, but lacking the explanation I sought. She concluded by pleading for me to return home or at least call her. Fuming with anger, I tore the letter to shreds and discarded it. Over the next week, 5 more letters arrived, nearly one each day. Feeling somewhat composed, I couldn't bring myself to discard them, so I stashed them away in a drawer without reading them. On the 25th day since my departure, I woke up determined and furious. That was it. I decided I wouldn't allow this agony to persist. I contacted the lawyer responsible for our business's legal affairs and instructed him to initiate the divorce paperwork. When he inquired about the circumstances, I disclosed Amy's infidelity but expressed my desire for a straightforward no-fault divorce, evenly dividing our assets, and thankfully, we had no children. I inquired about the timeline for serving Amy with the papers, to which he assured me it wouldn't take more than a couple of days. 2 days later, Amy left a frantic, sorrowful message on my office voicemail. How could I do this to her? Didn't I understand her love and willingness to do anything for me? She pleaded for communication, reconciliation, and my return home. The message left me drained and melancholic. There seemed to be no purpose in responding, so I refrained. Around a week after the divorce papers were served, I entered my office to find Margaret Selvin waiting for me. Margaret, Amy's older sister by nearly 13 years, resided in Seattle with her spouse and children. Although we had only met a few times at family gatherings and our wedding, I held her in high regard. It seemed we had established a friendship despite our limited interactions. "Hello, Mark. How are you?" I approached and kissed her cheek. "I'm doing okay, all things considered. I assume Amy has filled you in on the situation?" "Yes," she replied, "that's why I rushed over to Cincinnati. When I spoke to her on the phone 4 days ago, she sounded so distraught that I became concerned and booked a flight. I was worried she might harm herself." A knot formed in my stomach. "I'm sorry, Margaret, I had no clue. I haven't seen or spoken to Amy in weeks." "Mark, I won't beat around the bush. I've always had a good opinion of you, and I believe you feel the same about me. You've been a wonderful husband to Amy. You've brought her more happiness than she's ever known before. I'm here to ask you for a favor. Will you accompany me back to the house to see her?" I sighed. "I'm not sure it will make a difference, Margaret. Amy refuses to explain why she cheated on me, no matter how much I press her. I just can't move past this. It's time for both of us to move forward with our lives. She fixed her gaze on me. That's it, you're ready to give up on her? You don't love Amy anymore? I didn't say that I don't love her. But what she did devastated me, Margaret. I can't come to terms with it, and I can't comprehend it. With each passing day, it becomes a bit easier to let go of my love for her and to envision a future without her. What would it take for you to see her, Mark? That's simple, I replied. She needs to disclose everything, who that man was to her and why she spent the afternoon with him. She claims it was a mistake that won't happen again. If she can't be forthcoming with me, then there's no point in us having a conversation. Margaret leaned in, studying my face intently. What if I can convince her to share her side of the story with you, Mark? Would you be willing to listen? To try to understand her perspective? Of course, Margaret. I grew slightly heated. Just ease up a bit on me, all right? I'm not the one caught in bed with someone else. Did she divulge everything that happened on that tape to you? She sighed. Yes, Mark. And it's truly dreadful. Trust me, I can empathize with your feelings. We sat in silence for a moment. Margaret, if you can make Amy realize the importance of explaining why she was with Andy Darnton, then I'll return to the house and hear her out. I'll do my best, I'll try, to be patient and understanding. Although I struggle to envision what could make things right. Thank you, Mark. I'll be in touch. 2 days later, I pulled up to the house. Margaret had called to inform me that Amy was prepared to share the whole story. I was skeptical, but I had made a promise to give her a chance. Margaret welcomed me at the door, leading me to the living room where Amy sat on the sofa. She looked dreadful. Clad in her bathrobe, her hair unkempt, and dark circles under her eyes. She seemed to have lost a significant amount of weight. I had worried that she might rush into my arms when she saw me, but instead, she simply greeted me with a defeated "Hello, Mark," her voice devoid of energy. Her eyes lacked their usual sparkle. "Hello, Amy," I responded softly. I didn't say anything more, and after a brief pause, Amy began to speak. Her tone was subdued, lacking any hint of emotion. She spoke for quite some time, not meeting my gaze, but instead staring blankly across the room. What Amy told me. Margaret convinced me that I need to share this with you, Mark. I understand that once you hear the story, it will likely be the end for us. That's why I hesitated to tell you. But Margaret made me realize that if I don't speak up, you'll proceed with the divorce anyway. So, it seems like it doesn't make much difference either way. Do you remember when my dad passed away the summer before I started at UCLA? Well, after that, money was always tight. I had a scholarship, but it wasn't enough. I took on various part-time jobs, waitressing, temp work, but I couldn't cover my spring semester bill. Then a girl in my dorm mentioned that she had worked as an exotic dancer at a club for a year. It involved stripping down to a G-string and performing on a small stage, but she assured me it didn't go beyond that unless you wanted it to. The management protected the dancers, and the pay was incredible, much more than what I could earn as a waitress. At first, I couldn't imagine myself doing something like that. I was quite naive back then, Mark, and the thought terrified me. But desperation pushed me. So, I applied at the club, and they hired me. It wasn't as dreadful as I had anticipated. I got over the initial embarrassment quickly. It became just like any other job, like typing or serving burgers. Displaying my body became routine, and if a patron ever crossed the line, the bouncers swiftly dealt with them, so I felt safe. Andy Darnton, the man in the video, became the club's manager a few months after I started working there. He was professional with me and the other dancers, never inappropriate or intrusive. We went out for dinner a few weeks later, and soon we were dating. He was older, worldly, and I felt secure with him. I wasn't a virgin when we met, but I lacked experience in sexual matters, and he guided me. But it wasn't terrible, Mark. He was gentle and considerate. I even thought I loved him after some time. He introduced me to various sexual positions and taught me how to perform oral sex and swallow. Initially, I was horrified when he mentioned anal, but he gradually eased me into it. When we eventually tried it, he was patient and careful, so it wasn't too painful. Eventually, I grew to enjoy it somewhat, and I didn't mind doing it to please him. At the time, I didn't realize it, but in hindsight, I see how he gradually pushed me towards more risque behavior, dressing provocatively, flashing in public, and experimenting in bed. But he was always gentle, never coercive or intimidating. One night during my sophomore year, after nearly a year of dating Andy, he took me to a fancy nightclub frequented by celebrities, which was incredibly thrilling. He had given me ecstasy, something we occasionally did together, and combined with a few drinks, it had me feeling euphoric. We returned to his place, and he asked me to put on some provocative stockings and a garter belt. As we began having sex, I don't recall all the details, but we were in a spooning position on his bed, with him entering me from behind, and I was highly aroused. Suddenly, another man entered the room, an older gentleman who appeared to be around 50, overweight with silver hair. He stood there observing us before undressing himself. Andy continued with me, and then the older man approached, positioning his genitals near my mouth. Despite feeling intoxicated from the ecstasy and alcohol, I didn't scream or resist. I was so disoriented, I questioned whether it was real. Andy held me close, coaxing me to please the older man. I complied. My consciousness was hazy, with Andy penetrating me from behind while the older man received oral stimulation. The situation escalated, becoming increasingly distressing. They alternated positions, with the older man engaging in intercourse while Andy received oral attention. Then Andy laid on his back, and I mounted him while the older man penetrated me anally. I cried out from the pain, as Andy had always been gentle with me in that regard, but the older man was forceful. They continued, utilizing me in various ways, until it eventually ended. I was semi-conscious, still under the influence, overwhelmed with shame. I lay naked on the bed, feeling utterly used. I witnessed the older man, Tommy, dressing and exchanging words with Andy. Andy mentioned sending him a video and receiving payment. Tommy left, and Andy returned to me with enthusiasm, unaware of my turmoil. He engaged in intercourse again while I wished desperately for it to end. The following morning, while Andy was still asleep, I left quietly. I returned to the dorm, showered repeatedly, packed my belongings, and left for the bus station. One of my friends hailed from San Antonio and spoke highly of it, so I decided to take a bus ride that lasted 26 hours to get there. Upon arrival, I secured a job as a waitress, rented a modest apartment, and essentially went into hiding for 6 months. I had this irrational fear that Andy might come after me and try to reclaim me, which terrified me. Looking back, I realize now that he probably wouldn't have bothered chasing after me, considering there were plenty more like me back at the strip club. When I finally mustered up some courage, I submitted transfer applications to several colleges located far from Los Angeles. With my decent grades from UCLA, except for the semester I dropped out of, the University of Cincinnati offered me a generous scholarship, so I relocated here. You're already familiar with much of what followed. For a long time, I was too emotionally scarred to entertain the idea of dating anyone. When we eventually got together, I hadn't been with a man since Andy. I was petrified, but you were so gentle and loving, Mark. You always approached our lovemaking with the tenderness of a partner and husband, never treating me like an object. Of course, you were unaware of my past experiences. With you, I could pretend to be just an ordinary, regular woman. A few times, you expressed desires for more adventurous activities, like anal sex, and I panicked and halted you. It reminded me of my past in LA with Andy, and the memories were overwhelming. Thankfully, you were understanding and never pushed me beyond my comfort zone. After 10 years, thoughts of Andy and LA gradually faded away, and I believed I had put it all behind me, the shame, the feeling of being degraded. I didn't realize that I had merely buried those memories deep inside, avoiding confronting them. 6 months ago, out of nowhere, Andy contacted me. He had relocated to Cincinnati and coincidentally stumbled upon my picture in the newspaper for an article about TV stations and community service. Despite the article using my married name, he recognized me immediately and reached out. Hearing his voice terrified me. I hung up on him twice and stopped answering his calls. However, he left me a voicemail threatening to expose a videotape of me with him and Tommy if I didn't comply. He demanded money and insisted on meeting me again. I felt trapped, Mark. It wasn't about my job at the station or anything else. It was about you. I was afraid of losing you if you discovered the truth about my past. So I played along. I visited his house, knowing you would want to engage in sexual activity first before demanding money from me. Andy always fell asleep after intense sexual encounters, so I planned to make him climax multiple times. Once he was asleep, nothing could wake him up. He could sleep through an earthquake. My intention was to search his house in hopes of finding the incriminating tape he possessed. That's the whole story. I made him climax 4 times. Once he was asleep, I searched around and discovered a stack of tapes, neatly labeled. There must have been around 24 of them, including 3 copies of the one involving me, along with several others featuring different names. I collected them all in a trash bag and disposed of it in a dumpster behind a restaurant. Afterwards, I returned home and attempted to wash away the scent and sensation of him from my skin. I must have stood under that shower, crying, for over an hour. I genuinely believed I had finally rid myself of him, Mark. I hadn't heard from him again, and then a few weeks ago, he was involved in a fatal accident. I can't say I felt much remorse. I didn't realize there was anything to be concerned about until you arrived home with that tape. Foolish of me, I should have anticipated he might record me again, just like before. I don't know how you obtained it, but it doesn't matter much now. Now you know everything. He turned me into a prostitute. And I played along one last time, so I wouldn't have to face the truth and witness the disgust in your eyes. But it didn't work. And now, you can leave, and no one would blame you. Who would want to be married to a woman who did what I did? Who allowed herself to be exploited by her own boyfriend to a stranger? Who engaged in sexual acts with 2 men simultaneously, recorded for all to see? The room fell into silence. Glancing at Margaret, I noticed tears streaming down her face. I felt my own cheeks moisten. I anticipated Amy's reaction, tears, perhaps defiance, but she remained stoic, staring into the distance. I approached Amy, sat beside her on the sofa, and tenderly embraced her. She looked at me, startled, and upon seeing my smile, she burst into tears. I held her close, burying my face in her hair, as she wept uncontrollably. During this embrace, I recalled a conversation we had when we were engaged. I suggested discussing our romantic histories, the individuals we had been involved with, but Amy's demeanor abruptly shifted. That's all in the past, Mark, she asserted firmly. I don't need or want to know about your previous relationships, and I hope you won't pressure me to disclose details about mine. Now that I'm with you, and we're happy, can't we just start fresh? Her expression was resolute and earnest at that moment, and I readily agreed. Now, for the first time, I comprehended the painful memories she had been shielding me from and attempting to forget herself. After several minutes of sobbing in my arms, Amy gradually composed herself. When she eventually turned to look at me, I maintained my smile. Her expression hardened, and she struck my arm with her fist in frustration. All right, Mark, you fulfilled your duty. You've listened to my story, allowed me to release my emotions, acted as the caring husband one last time, now please leave. I can't bear to look at you any longer. Sorry, I replied, maintaining my smile. You're stuck with me. Then I held her close as she continued to cry. Amy allowed me to guide her into the shower, where I tenderly shampooed her hair, bathed her, and then tucked her into bed. She slept for a solid 13 hours, likely compensating for several sleepless nights. I contacted her employer and arranged for some medical leave, while Margaret assisted me in finding a therapist for Amy. Initially hesitant, Amy claimed she had nothing to discuss. However, with both Margaret and myself encouraging her, she eventually agreed to attend therapy sessions. Although we refrained from intimacy for nearly 2 weeks, every night Amy nestled against me in bed, as if afraid I might vanish during the night. Some nights were plagued by nightmares for one or both of us, but we comforted each other with soothing words whenever one of us woke up frightened. One Friday evening, upon returning home from work, I searched for Amy throughout the house to no avail. Finally, I entered our bedroom to find her sitting up in bed, smiling warmly at me, completely nude. "Honey, it's time," she simply said. Our lovemaking that night was tender and affectionate, pure vanilla, and it rivaled the happiness I felt on the day Amy accepted my marriage proposal. We took our time, exchanging kisses and sweet words, embracing each other lovingly. From that point on, things improved rapidly. Amy's therapist helped her comprehend her past relationship with Andy, emphasizing her role as a victim rather than a guilty party. Amy also began to embrace her sexuality fully, allowing herself to explore beyond the vanilla without feeling ashamed. Once Amy returned to work full-time after about 3 weeks, life started feeling more normal for both of us. With our focus shifting from marital and sexual troubles to work and shared activities, we regained a sense of normalcy. We enjoyed hiking and canoeing on weekends, cooked together, and spent more time with friends. It took some time, but one Saturday morning I knew we were on our way to full recovery. As Amy left the bed early, I dozed off again. An hour later, she woke me with a gentle shake and a wide smile. Breakfast in bed awaited me on a tray, accompanied by toast, bacon, juice, and coffee. On the nightstand, there sat a pink vibrator and a bottle of lube. I raised an eyebrow, and Amy grinned. "I thought we could enjoy breakfast first, then spend the morning indoors," she suggested. "There are a few things we've never tried together that I'd like to explore with you. How does that sound?" I kissed her passionately and replied, "Sounds perfect to me." Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel not to miss new videos.